I was halfway through my morning coffee when I heard the chainsaws, and something about the sound made my stomach drop before my brain even caught up to what was happening. My name is James Ingram, and I own 15 acres of pristine timberland in northwestern Pennsylvania, just outside a small town called Titulesville. The property had been in my family for 3 generations, thick with old-growth oak, maple, and cherry trees that my grandfather had carefully maintained. I had moved into the old farmhouse 2 years ago after my divorce, looking for peace and a fresh start. What I found instead was a nightmare wrapped in a homeowners association rulebook. The Meadowbrook Estates HOA had formed 5 years before I moved in, when a developer bought the adjacent land and built 23 cookie-cutter houses on what used to be farmland. My property predated the HOA by decades, and I had made it crystal clear when they came sniffing around that I had zero interest in joining their little club. Pennsylvania law was on my side. You cannot force existing property owners into an HOA they never agreed to join. But that did not stop Patricia Donnelly from trying. Patricia was the HOA president, a 52-year-old woman with highlighted blonde hair always styled in the same soccer mom cut, and an expression that suggested she had just bitten into a lemon. She drove a white Lexus SUV with a "Live, Laugh, Love" sticker on it, and she had made it her personal mission to bring me into compliance from the day I moved in. The chainsaws were getting louder. I set down my coffee and walked to the back window. What I saw made my blood run cold. 3 massive logging trucks were parked on my property, and a crew of at least 8 men with industrial equipment were systematically taking down my trees. A huge oak that had to be 200 years old was already half cut, its ancient trunk groaning as it started to lean. I ran outside in my socks, no jacket, not caring about anything except stopping this. "Hey, what the hell are you doing? This is private property." A man in a hard hat and fluorescent vest turned to me, holding a clipboard. "You the owner?" "Yes, I am the damn owner. Who authorized this?" He frowned and flipped through papers on his clipboard. "We got a work order from the Meadowbrook Estates HOA, supposed to be clearing this lot for a community park expansion." "Community park? This is my land. I am not part of any HOA." The chainsaw operator had stopped when he heard the yelling, but the oak was already too far gone. With a crack that sounded like a gunshot, it toppled, crashing through smaller trees on its way down. I felt that crash in my chest like a physical blow. "Stop! Stop everything right now!" I was yelling, and I did not care who heard me. "You're on private property. You need to leave immediately." The foreman's expression shifted from confusion to concern. "Hold on. Let me call the office." He pulled out his phone and walked away, speaking in low tones. I pulled my own phone out and dialed 911. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped it. 911, what's your emergency? "There are people logging my property without permission. They're destroying my trees right now. I need the police here immediately." The dispatcher took my information and assured me someone was on the way. I stood there in the cold November morning, watching these men mill about uncertainly, their equipment idling. Another tree was already down, and another. My grandfather's legacy, my family's history, being turned into lumber right before my eyes. The foreman came back over. "My boss says we have a signed contract with the HOA. Patricia Donnelly signed it herself." "Patricia Donnelly has no authority over my property. This is timber theft and you are committing a felony." His face went pale. "Timber theft? In Pennsylvania, unlawfully cutting down someone's trees is timber theft. It is a 3rd-degree felony, and there's something called treble damages. That means I can sue for 3 times the value of every tree you have cut down." The foreman started barking orders immediately. Pack it up. Everyone stop work right now. We are leaving. You are not going anywhere until the police get here, I said. You just committed a crime on my property. 20 minutes later, 2 Pennsylvania State Police cruisers pulled up my long driveway. Trooper Michael Brennan and Trooper Sarah Chen took statements from everyone. The logging company, Henderson Timber Services out of Erie, showed them the contract. It was official looking, on Meadowbrook Estates letterhead, signed by Patricia Donnelly in her capacity as HOA president, authorizing the land clearing and timber harvesting of Lot 47. "Sir, is this Lot 47?" Trooper Brennan asked me. "I have no idea what lot number they assigned in their records." "This is 1847 Willow Creek Road, and it has been private property since 1952. I never joined the HOA. I never signed anything giving them authority over my land." Trooper Chen was examining the contract. "This legal description does not match the county property records. They listed coordinates that fall on your property, Mr. Ingram. So they tried to steal my land by renumbering it. It looks more like gross incompetence," she said, but her expression was grim. "We will need to speak with Mrs. Donnelly." The logging crew was not arrested, since they had been acting on what they believed was a legitimate contract. But Trooper Brennan made it clear they needed to stick around the area and would likely be called as witnesses. The foreman looked like he wanted to throw up. I did not feel much better. After the police left, I walked my property. The damage was catastrophic. They had taken down 37 trees in total, including 6 massive oaks, 12 cherry trees, and 19 maples. The stumps looked like tombstones. Slash and branches were scattered everywhere. Deep ruts from the heavy equipment had torn up the forest floor. It looked like a war zone. I sat down on one of the stumps and cried. I am not ashamed to admit it. These were not just trees. They were my connection to my grandfather, who had shown me how to identify each species, how to tap the maples for syrup, how to be a steward of the land. And Patricia Donnelly had destroyed them because of what? Some petty power trip. My phone rang. It was my lawyer, Tom Hendricks. I had called him right after the police. "James, I just got your message. Tell me everything." I walked him through the whole situation, my voice still shaking. Tom had handled my house purchase and knew about my ongoing issues with the HOA. "Okay, here's what we are going to do," Tom said. "First, I am going to get a forestry expert out there today to assess the damage. Second, we are going to document everything. Photos, videos, the works. Third, we are filing both criminal charges and a civil lawsuit, timber theft, trespass, and we will go after the HOA for every penny." "Can they even pay? It is just a neighborhood HOA. They carry liability insurance and they have an operating fund from all the dues they collect. But honestly, James, depending on the value of those trees, this could bankrupt them. Old-growth timber is expensive, really expensive. And with treble damages, we are talking potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars." The number made me dizzy. "I do not care about the money. I want Patricia Donnelly held accountable. She will be. Trust me on that." Within 2 hours, Tom's forestry expert arrived. His name was Douglas Harper, a certified forester with 30 years of experience. He spent 4 hours walking my property with a tablet, measuring stumps, taking samples, referencing timber market prices. I followed him around, still in shock. "Mr. Ingram," Douglas said finally, "I need to tell you something. Those oaks alone were worth a fortune. Old-growth oak veneer logs can sell for $5,000 to $10,000 per 1,000 board feet. That biggest one you lost, I estimated, had at least 8,000 board feet of prime veneer quality wood. I did the math in my head. $80,000 for one tree. And the cherry. Black cherry is premium furniture wood. You had several that were veneer grade. The maples were younger but still valuable. I will have a full report by tomorrow, but my preliminary estimate for the stumpage value of what was cut is around $450,000. I sat down hard on the ground. $450,000. With treble damages, that is over $1.3 million. And that is before we factor in restoration costs, loss of property value, and punitive damages. That evening, I got a visit I was not expecting. Patricia Donnelly showed up at my door with her husband, Frank, a quiet accountant who always looked vaguely apologetic about his wife's existence. "James, we need to talk," Patricia said, trying to push past me into my house. I blocked the doorway. "You can talk to my lawyer." "This is ridiculous. It was an honest mistake. The surveyor gave me the wrong coordinates. You tried to claim my property as an HOA lot, Patricia." "That is not a mistake. That is fraud." Frank spoke up, his voice nervous. "Mr. Ingram, please. If this goes to court, it will destroy the HOA. The insurance might not cover it all. Homeowners could be on the hook. Then you should have controlled your wife before she committed a felony." Patricia's face turned red. "How dare you? I am trying to build a nice community here, and you have been nothing but obstinate since day one. Your property is an eyesore. Those trees block the view. The whole neighborhood will be better off with a park. Get off my property. Now. Before I call the police again. You are going to regret this." Patricia shouted as I closed the door in her face. Through the window, I watched Frank guide his wife back to their Lexus, her arms gesticulating wildly as she ranted. I felt a grim satisfaction. She had no idea what was coming. The next morning, Tom filed the lawsuit in Crawford County Court. The local newspaper, the Titusville Herald, picked up the story by afternoon. By evening, it had gone regional. By the weekend, I was getting calls from Pittsburgh news stations. The story had everything people loved: wealthy HOA overreach, environmental destruction, David versus Goliath. I gave one interview to the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, laying out the facts simply. The reporter, a sharp woman named Ellen Morrison, did her homework. She found out that Patricia had been cited multiple times for HOA violations against other homeowners over trivial issues. One elderly couple had been fined $15,000 because their mailbox was the wrong shade of black. The story went viral. My phone would not stop ringing. National news outlets wanted interviews. Someone started a Justice for James Facebook group that got 30,000 members in 3 days. Environmental groups reached out offering support. A timber rights advocacy organization I had never heard of called to say they would file an amicus brief. Patricia Donnelly went to ground. The HOA website went offline. But at the grocery store, I started getting approached by people from the Meadowbrook Estates development. A woman named Rachel Edwards found me in the produce section. "Mr. Ingram, I am so sorry about what happened. Most of us had no idea Patricia was doing this. She runs that HOA like a dictatorship." "Did she have board approval for this?" I asked. Rachel shook her head. "There was a brief mention in last month's meeting minutes about exploring park expansion options, but nothing about logging private property. She just did it." That was important information, and I passed it along to Tom immediately. The criminal investigation moved forward rapidly. The Pennsylvania State Police brought in forensic accountants to examine the HOA's finances. What they found was explosive. Patricia had used HOA funds to pay Henderson Timber Services a $30,000 down payment for the logging work. She had authorized the expense without a board vote. But that was just the start. The forensic audit revealed that Patricia had been treating the HOA account like her personal piggy bank for years. Unauthorized purchases, questionable expense reimbursements, payments to her own landscaping company that Frank ran as a side business. The district attorney, a no-nonsense woman named Jennifer Carlson, filed charges. Patricia Donnelly was arrested on a Tuesday morning. Timber theft, criminal trespass, theft by unlawful taking, and 3 counts of misapplication of entrusted property. The local news showed her doing a perp walk in handcuffs, her perfectly styled hair finally mussed, her face blotchy and tear-stained. Frank posted bail, but the damage was done. Their lives were over as they knew them. The HOA held an emergency meeting. Patricia was removed as president immediately. A new board was elected, headed by a retired lawyer named Margaret Foster, who seemed to understand the gravity of the situation. She called me personally. "Mr. Ingram, on behalf of the Meadowbrook Estates HOA, I want to apologize. What Patricia did was criminal and inexcusable. We are cooperating fully with your lawsuit and with law enforcement." "I appreciate that, Mrs. Foster, but the lawsuit is not going away." "I understand. Our insurance company is already involved." "I just wanted you to know that the current board had nothing to do with this, and we are trying to make things right. The only thing that makes this right is full accountability. You will have it." Douglas Harper's full report came in at $487,000 in timber value. Tom added in restoration costs, property devaluation, legal fees, and emotional distress. With treble damages, the civil suit demanded $1.9 million. The HOA's insurance company offered $500,000 to settle. Tom laughed in their face and said we would see them in court. The trial took place in May, 7 months after the logging. I testified about my grandfather, about the legacy of those trees, about watching them fall. Douglas Harper testified about the timber value, bringing charts and photographs that showed the jury exactly what had been destroyed. The logging crew foreman testified that he would never have done the work if he had known the truth about the property ownership. Patricia's defense was that it was an honest mistake, that she had relied on a surveyor's report. But Tom shredded that on cross-examination. He showed that Patricia had never hired a licensed surveyor. She had used an online mapping tool and made assumptions. She had never checked county records. She had never contacted me. She had simply decided that my land should belong to the HOA and acted accordingly. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. They found the HOA liable for $1.7 million in damages. The judgment included $1.4 million in treble damages for the timber theft and $300,000 in punitive damages. The Meadowbrook Estates HOA had $78,000 in their operating fund. Their insurance policy capped out at $600,000. They were $1.02 million short. The only option was a special assessment on every homeowner in the development. 23 homes, each owing roughly $44,000 to satisfy the judgment. The reaction was explosive. Homeowners who had nothing to do with Patricia's actions were suddenly facing financial ruin. Some talked about bankruptcy. Others put their homes up for sale immediately, but who wants to buy into a development with a massive special assessment hanging over it? I did not feel good about it. These were innocent people paying for Patricia Donnelly's crimes, but Tom was firm. "You were the innocent party too, James. You lost irreplaceable trees. They can pay over time. The court will work with them, but you cannot just eat this loss." He was right, but it did not make me feel better. Patricia's criminal trial happened in August. She was convicted on all counts. The judge, a stern man named Harold Mitchum, was not sympathetic. "Mrs. Donnelly, you abused a position of trust. You misappropriated funds. You destroyed property that had stood for 2 centuries. Your actions have caused financial hardship to dozens of families. I find your conduct appalling." He sentenced her to 2 to 4 years in state prison, with eligibility for parole after 18 months. Frank filed for divorce 2 weeks later. The HOA entered into a payment plan with me, supervised by the court. Every homeowner in Meadowbrook Estates would pay an additional $367 per month for 10 years to satisfy the judgment. Property values in the development plummeted. 3 families declared bankruptcy. The neighborhood became a cautionary tale, featured in national news stories about HOA overreach. I used some of the money to begin restoration work on my property. I hired an ecological restoration company out of State College. They removed the stumps, restored the forest floor, and planted hundreds of saplings. Oaks, cherries, maples. The trees would not reach maturity in my lifetime, but maybe my kids would see them. If I ever had kids, the rest of the money went into a trust to maintain the property in perpetuity. I had a conservation easement drawn up, ensuring that the land would never be developed, never be logged except for careful forest management. It would remain wild. On a cool October morning, exactly 1 year after the logging, I walked my property with a reporter from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Ellen Morrison had followed the story from the beginning and wanted to do a 1-year retrospective. "You have any regrets?" she asked me as we stood near where the biggest oak had fallen. A young oak sapling, barely 3 feet tall, grew a few yards away. "Regrets about the lawsuit? No. Patricia Donnelly committed a crime. She had to face consequences. But the homeowners, they are paying for their representatives' actions. That is how collective responsibility works. Maybe next time they will pay more attention to who they elect to run their HOA. Maybe they will ask questions when someone proposes something that sounds too good to be true." The HOA is talking about dissolving entirely, converting to a voluntary neighborhood association instead. Good. Mandatory HOAs have too much power and too little oversight. What happened to me could happen to anyone. Ellen looked around at the recovering forest. Will it ever be the same? No, but it will be something. Life finds a way. After she left, I sat on the porch of my grandfather's farmhouse and drank my coffee. The chainsaws were long gone, replaced by bird song and wind through the branches of the surviving trees. The saplings would grow. The forest would heal, but some scars never completely fade. Every time I looked at those young trees, I would remember what had stood there before. Every time I thought about Patricia Donnelly sitting in a prison cell, I felt a complicated mix of satisfaction and sadness. Justice had been served. The law had worked the way it was supposed to. But justice is often expensive for everyone involved. My phone buzzed. It was Tom. "James, you are going to want to see this. The state legislature is introducing a bill they are calling the Ingram Act. It creates stricter requirements for HOAs exercising any authority near non-member properties. Mandatory insurance minimums, criminal penalties for fraudulent property claims, and protections for landowners. They are naming it after me. You are famous, buddy. Might as well get used to it." I laughed, but it was a hollow sound. I did not want to be famous. I just wanted to be left alone with my trees. But if my nightmare could prevent someone else from going through the same thing, maybe there was meaning in it after all. Over the following months, life slowly returned to something resembling normal. The restoration work continued. I hired a part-time forester to help me develop a long-term forest management plan. We marked trees for selective harvest, identified areas that needed underplanting, created wildlife habitat improvements. I also started getting letters. Dozens of them, then hundreds. People from across the country who had their own HOA horror stories. A man in Florida whose HOA had tried to fine him for displaying an American flag. a violation of federal law. A woman in Texas whose HOA had foreclosed on her home over $800 in unpaid dues while she was deployed overseas with the Army. An elderly couple in Arizona whose HOA had banned them from having their therapy dog. Each story made me angrier. The system was broken. HOAs were supposed to maintain property values and community standards, but too often they became petty fiefdoms run by people with too much time and too little accountability. I started responding to the letters, offering advice, connecting people with resources. Tom said I was becoming an activist whether I wanted to be or not. You have a platform now, James. People are listening. You could make a real difference. I was not sure I wanted that responsibility, but I could not just ignore the problem either. In December, I was invited to testify before the Pennsylvania House Judiciary Committee about HOA reform legislation. I almost said no, but Tom convinced me. These are people with the power to change things. Tell them your story. Make them understand what is at stake. So I drove to Harrisburg on a cold Wednesday and sat at a table facing a panel of state representatives. I told them about my grandfather's trees. I told them about Patricia Donnelly and her fraudulent land grab. I told them about the 23 families now struggling under crushing debt because one person had too much power and too little oversight. HOAs need checks and balances, I said. They need transparency requirements, mandatory audits, and criminal penalties for people who abuse their authority. What happened to me was not unique. It is just the most visible recent example. If we do not reform these laws, it will keep happening. Representative David Kowalski, who had sponsored the reform bill, nodded seriously. Mr. Ingram, what would you say to people who argue that HOAs provide valuable services and that most operate responsibly? I would say they are right. Most do. But the law has to protect people from the ones that do not. We do not skip building fire exits just because most buildings never burn down. We do not eliminate fraud laws because most people are honest. We create safeguards for when things go wrong. Right now, Pennsylvania law gives HOAs enormous power with minimal accountability. That needs to change. The committee passed the reform bill out of committee 2 weeks later. It would still need to pass the full House and Senate, but it was progress. Back home, winter had settled over the property. Snow covered the stumps and the slash piles we had not yet cleared. The young saplings stood like fragile promises against the white landscape. I got a letter from Patricia Donnelly. It had been forwarded through Tom's office. Against his advice, I opened it. "Dear Mr. Ingram," it began in cramped handwriting. "I know you will probably throw this away without reading it, but I needed to try. I am writing from Cambridge Springs. I have had a lot of time to think about what I did, and I want you to know that I am sorry. I convinced myself that I was doing the right thing for the community. I told myself that your property would be better used as a park, but the truth is, I just wanted to win. I wanted to prove that I could make things happen, that I was important. I destroyed something irreplaceable because of my ego. There is no excuse for that. I do not expect you to forgive me. I just wanted you to know that I understand what I took from you, and I will carry that guilt for the rest of my life. I am sorry." I read the letter 3 times, then put it in a drawer. I was not ready to forgive her. Maybe I never would be. But I appreciated that she had at least acknowledged the truth. Christmas came and went quietly. I spent it alone, which was fine. I had never been much for the holidays anyway. On New Year's Eve, I stood on my back porch and watched fireworks from town light up the sky in the distance. Another year gone. Another year closer to the trees being restored. In February, I got a surprise visitor. Margaret Foster, the new HOA president, knocked on my door on a Saturday morning. "Mr. Ingram, I know you probably do not want to see anyone from the HOA, but I have something I need to discuss with you." I let her in, warily. She was a small woman in her 70s, with white hair and sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "The homeowners have been talking," she said, settling into my kitchen chair with a cup of coffee I offered mostly out of politeness. "About the assessment payments, about what happened, and we had an idea. I am listening. We want to help with the restoration. Not financially, we cannot change the judgment, but with labor. We have people who can help plant trees, clear brush, whatever you need. We thought it might help build some goodwill, and frankly, people want to do something positive. They feel terrible about what happened, even though it was not their fault." I was caught off guard. "You want to volunteer on my property, if you would allow it. We understand if you say no, but we thought we should ask." I thought about it for a long moment. Part of me wanted to tell her to get out, that I wanted nothing to do with anyone from Meadowbrook Estates, but another part recognized an olive branch when I saw one. "Okay," I said finally, "but there are rules. This is my land. We do things my way, and if anyone gives me grief, they are gone." Fair enough. The first workday happened in March, as soon as the ground thawed enough for planting. 18 people showed up, ranging in age from teenagers to retirees. They wore work gloves and boots and looked nervous. I gave them a brief orientation, explaining what we were doing and why. "These trees are not going to mature for decades, maybe centuries. You will not see the full results of your work today, but your grandchildren might. That is what stewardship means, thinking beyond yourself." We planted 73 saplings that day. Oak, cherry, maple, and some native understory species like dogwood and redbud. People worked hard, asking questions, listening to instructions. By the end of the day, everyone was exhausted and muddy. A man named Gregory Walker approached me as people were packing up. "Mr. Ingram, I just wanted to say thank you for letting us do this. My family has been stressed about the assessment, angry at Patricia, angry at the situation. This gave us a chance to do something constructive. It means a lot. You are welcome. If you want to come back, we will have more work days. We will be here." The volunteer days became a monthly occurrence. Not everyone from the development participated, but enough did that we made real progress. The restoration work that would have taken years was getting done in months. And something else happened too. I started getting to know my neighbors. Rachel Edwards brought her kids, twins named Sophie and Nathan, who were full of questions about trees and wildlife. Gregory Walker turned out to be a retired biology teacher with a wealth of knowledge about native plants. An older couple, Henry and Doris Fitzgerald, brought homemade cookies to every workday and had endless stamina for hauling mulch. I was not forgetting what had happened. The scars on the land remained, but new growth was happening, literally and figuratively. In April, the Ingram Act passed the Pennsylvania House by a wide margin. It still needed Senate approval, but momentum was building. Other states were watching, considering similar legislation. I got a call from a consumer advocacy group in Colorado asking if I would consult on their HOA reform efforts. "I am not an expert," I told them. "I am just a guy whose trees got cut down. You are the most famous HOA victim in America right now. People will listen to you." "I will think about it." But I was already thinking about it, about all those letters I had received, all those people suffering under petty tyrants with too much power. If I could help them, did I not have an obligation to try? Tom was thrilled when I told him I was considering taking on a more public role. "You could do speaking engagements, consult on legislation, maybe even write a book. Let us not get ahead of ourselves. The trees come first." The trees are doing fine. You are allowed to have more than one priority." He was right, but it was hard to shift focus. The land had been my sanctuary, my escape from the world. The idea of deliberately engaging with that world again was daunting. In May, Patricia Donnelly came up for her parole hearing. She had served 18 months and was eligible for early release. The district attorney's office contacted me to see if I wanted to submit a victim impact statement or appear at the hearing. I spent a week wrestling with the decision. Part of me wanted her to serve every day of her sentence. But another part recognized that she had already lost everything: her freedom, her marriage, her reputation, her community standing. What would be gained by keeping her locked up longer? I wrote a statement but did not attend the hearing. In it, I explained the impact of her actions, the irreplaceable loss, the ongoing restoration efforts. But I also acknowledged her letter and her apparent remorse. I left the decision to the parole board. They granted her parole with conditions: no contact with me, no involvement with any HOA, community service requirements, and continued mental health counseling. She was released on a Tuesday. The local news covered it briefly, showing a much thinner Patricia Donnelly leaving the prison in civilian clothes, her head down. No comments to the press. I heard through the grapevine that she had moved to Ohio to live with her sister. Good riddance. The monthly volunteer days continued through the summer. By August, we had planted over 500 saplings and cleared most of the slash from the original logging. The property was starting to look like a forest again, instead of a disaster zone. On the anniversary of the logging, 2 years after it happened, I held a small ceremony. The volunteers who had been helping with restoration came, along with Tom, Douglas Harper, Ellen Morrison from the newspaper, and a few other people who had become friends through this nightmare. I stood where the biggest oak had been and spoke without notes. 2 years ago, I lost trees that had stood for 2 centuries. I lost a connection to my grandfather and my family history. I lost something I can never get back, but I gained something too. I gained an understanding of how fragile our rights are, how important it is to hold people accountable, and how community can be rebuilt even after betrayal. These trees behind me are not the ones I lost. They never will be, but they are a promise to the future. They are evidence that destruction is not the end of the story. Thank you all for being part of this. We planted one more tree together, a special oak sapling that Douglas had sourced from an old growth preservation area. It would outlive all of us, if we were lucky. Later that evening, Tom and I sat on the porch drinking beer and watching the sun set over the recovering forest. "The Ingram Act passed the Senate today," he said casually. "Governor is expected to sign it next week." I looked at him. "You are joking." "Nope. You are officially going to have a law named after you. That is surreal. You earned it. What you went through, how you handled it, it mattered. Real change is happening because you did not just roll over." I did not have a choice. Everyone has a choice. You chose to fight. A lot of people would have just taken a settlement and tried to move on. The trees deserved better than that. Yeah, they did. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the evening sounds of the forest, crickets, birds settling in for the night, wind in the leaves. "What are you going to do now?" Tom asked. "What do you mean? The restoration is on track. The lawsuit is settled. Patricia is in Ohio. The law is changing. What is next for James Ingram?" I thought about it. "I have been contacted by HOA reform groups in 6 states. There is a documentary crew that wants to film here. The Pennsylvania Forestry Association asked me to join their board. Sounds like you will be busy." "Yeah, but the land comes first, always. Of course." The following month, I did my first speaking engagement at a property rights conference in Philadelphia. I was nervous as hell, but once I started talking about the trees, about what had happened, the words came easily. The audience listened intently, asked thoughtful questions, and gave me a standing ovation at the end. A woman approached me afterward, tears in her eyes. My HOA is trying to force me to remove a tree in my yard because it blocks someone else's view. Your story gave me the courage to fight back. Thank you. That was when I knew Tom had been right. This was bigger than just me and my trees. Over the next year, I consulted on HOA reform legislation in Colorado, Texas, Arizona, and Florida. I gave interviews to national media. The documentary, Timber Theft, One Man's Fight Against HOA Overreach, premiered at a film festival and was picked up by a streaming service. My quiet life as a semi-recluse in the Pennsylvania woods was definitively over, but I never lost focus on what mattered. Every month, the volunteer days continued. Every season, the forest grew stronger. 3 years after the logging, a wildlife survey showed that deer, turkey, and even a black bear were using the restored areas. The ecosystem was healing. I got occasional updates about Patricia Donnelly through mutual acquaintances. She was working as a cashier at a grocery store in Columbus. She lived in a small apartment alone. She had not tried to contact me again. I hoped she had found some measure of peace, but I did not spend much time thinking about her. My focus was forward, not backward. In the 4th year after the logging, something remarkable happened. One of the original oak saplings, planted that first volunteer day, produced its first acorns. They were small and there were not many, but it was a sign. The forest was not just recovering, it was reproducing. I collected those acorns carefully and planted them in a nursery bed. If they germinated, I would plant them out the following spring. The cycle of growth and renewal would continue. The last payment from the Meadowbrook Estates homeowners came through in the 5th year. The judgment was satisfied in full. Margaret Foster called me to let me know. "We made it, Mr. Ingram. It was hard, but we made it." I know it was. I appreciate everyone sticking with it. Will you keep doing the volunteer days? If people want to keep coming. We do. It has become a tradition. People bring their kids. It is part of the neighborhood culture now. That made me smile. Something good had come from something terrible. Not a replacement, not a fix, but a new beginning. I still live on the property. The farmhouse has been updated, but it is still recognizably my grandfather's place. The forest continues to grow, inch by inch, year by year. The saplings are taller now, some reaching 15 or 20 feet. In another decade, they will start to look like real trees. In a century, they will be what the originals were. I will not see that. But knowing it will happen is enough. The Ingram Act has inspired similar legislation in 14 states now. HOA abuses still happen, but there are more safeguards, more accountability, more ways for victims to fight back. I get emails regularly from people thanking me for giving them hope and tools to address their own situations. I never wanted to be a public figure. I just wanted to live quietly with my trees. But sometimes life has other plans, and you have to adapt or break. On the 5th anniversary of the logging, I held another ceremony. This one was bigger, with people coming from across the state. Representatives from environmental groups, property rights organizations, legal reform advocates, and of course, the Meadowbrook Estates volunteers who had become friends. We planted an entire grove of trees that day, donated by conservation organizations from across the region. 100 trees in one day, each one tagged with the name of the donor and the species. It was a living monument to persistence and renewal. As the sun set and people started to leave, Rachel Edwards approached me with her twins, who were now gangly teenagers instead of curious elementary school kids. "Mr. Ingram, Sophie and Nathan wanted to tell you something." Sophie spoke first, her voice shy but determined. "We are doing our senior project on forest ecology and restoration. We are using your land as our case study, if that is okay. We have been coming to the volunteer days since we were little," Nathan added. "This place taught us that you can fix things if you are willing to work hard and be patient." I felt my throat tighten. "Of course you can use the land for your project. I would be honored." After they left, I walked the property alone in the fading light. The young trees cast long shadows. Birdsong filled the air. The forest floor was covered in new growth: ferns, wildflowers, mushrooms. The ecosystem was complex and alive again. I stopped at the spot where the biggest oak had stood. The stump was gone now, ground up and composted. A young oak grew a few feet away, planted that first terrible day after the logging. It was about 12 feet tall now, its trunk as thick as my wrist, its leaves rustling in the evening breeze. "You are not him," I said to the tree. "You will never be him. But you are here, and you are growing, and that is enough." The tree, of course, did not answer. But the wind through its leaves sounded almost like a whisper, and I chose to take it as agreement. Walking back to the farmhouse, I thought about the journey from that terrible November morning to this quiet October evening. The anger, the grief, the legal battles, the slow process of healing and rebuilding. All of it had led to this moment, standing in a recovering forest surrounded by evidence that destruction is not final, that patient work can restore what was lost, even if it is never quite the same. Patricia Donnelly had tried to take my land and had destroyed my trees. But she had not destroyed me. If anything, her actions had forced me to engage with the world in ways I never would have otherwise. I had become an advocate, an activist, a symbol of resistance against petty tyranny. I had helped change laws and protect others from similar fates. That was not nothing. Inside the farmhouse, I poured a glass of whiskey and sat at the kitchen table where my grandfather used to sit. His presence was still here, in the worn floorboards and the solid oak table and the view out the window to the land he had loved. "I did my best, Grandpa," I said to the empty room. "The trees are coming back. It will take time, but they are coming back." In the silence that followed, I could almost hear his voice, gruff and certain. "That is all anyone can do, boy. Plant the trees and let time do its work." So that is what I would keep doing. Planting trees, advocating for reform, helping others fight their battles against HOA overreach. The land would recover. The forest would grow. And someday, long after I was gone, someone would stand under the shade of those oaks and cherries and maples, never knowing the story of how they came to be there. That was fine. The trees would know. The land would remember, and that was enough. Outside, night had fully fallen. The stars were bright in the clear autumn sky, unobscured by city lights. Somewhere in the recovering forest, an owl called. Another answered from across the valley. The world turned as it always had and always would. I finished my whiskey and went to bed, content in the knowledge that tomorrow I would wake up and the trees would be a little taller, the forest a little stronger, and justice a little more firmly rooted in the world. It had been a long 5 years, but we had made it through. The land, the community, and me. Changed, scarred, but ultimately stronger for what we had endured, and that was the real victory. Not the money, not the new law bearing my name, not even the criminal conviction of Patricia Donnelly. The real victory was that we had not let destruction be the end of the story. We had chosen to rebuild, to restore, to move forward. The trees would grow. Life would continue. And somewhere in Pennsylvania, on 15 acres of recovering forest land, my grandfather's legacy would live on, not as it had been, but as something new and equally valuable. That was enough. That was everything. And as I drifted off to sleep in the old farmhouse, surrounded by the sounds of the healing forest, I felt something I had not felt in a long time: peace.